There is a fear most people will never confess. It does not shout. It does not panic in public. It does not tremble like obvious anxiety. It hides behind composure. It whispers instead, what if I'm not thinking for myself? What if my beliefs are shaped? What if my emotions are engineered? What if my decisions are guided by forces I barely notice? For centuries, thinkers have studied power, but beneath political power lies something far more intimate: control over the human mind. In The Prince, Niccolò Machiavelli observed that people are moved more by perception than by truth. Appearances, narratives, symbols, these shape loyalty more effectively than raw force. Centuries later, psychology would confirm what Machiavelli intuitively understood. The mind is powerful, but it is not invulnerable, and deep inside us lives a silent terror, the fear that our autonomy is more fragile than we think. This is not a story about conspiracy. This is a study of psychology, of perception, of influence, and of why losing control over our own thinking feels like losing ourselves. Control is not just about power. It is about identity. From childhood, we build our sense of self around choice. I chose this friend. I chose this opinion. I chose this path. The belief that I am the author of my decisions is foundational to psychological stability. According to self-determination theory in psychology, autonomy is one of the three basic human needs, alongside competence and relatedness. When autonomy is threatened, anxiety increases, stress rises, defensiveness activates, because when control weakens, identity shakes. Psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, in Man's Search for Meaning, described that even in concentration camps, where external control was stripped away, the last human freedom was the ability to choose one's attitude. That internal control preserved dignity. It preserved identity. The fear of losing control over the mind is not really about manipulation. It is about losing authorship. If someone can shape what you think, then who are you? If your reactions are predictable, are they truly yours? This fear touches something primal, the need to feel self-directed. Without that, the ego fractures. Influence rarely announces itself. It does not arrive saying, I will now change your mind. It moves quietly, through tone, through repetition, through emotional framing. Psychologist Robert Cialdini, in Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion, demonstrated how principles like authority, scarcity, and social proof subtly shape decisions, often without conscious awareness. People comply not because they are weak, but because they are human. The brain is wired for efficiency. It uses shortcuts, heuristics, to make rapid decisions. If many people believe something, it feels safer. If an authority endorses something, it feels credible. If something is scarce, it feels valuable. These shortcuts are adaptive, but they are also exploitable. And when individuals become aware of how predictable their minds can be, discomfort rises. Because influence works best when unnoticed. And once noticed, it raises a disturbing question. How much of what I believe was truly examined? Niccolò Machiavelli, in The Prince, wrote that a ruler must appear virtuous, even if he must act otherwise when necessary. Why? Because people judge with their eyes more than with their hands. In other words, perception governs loyalty. This was not simply political advice. It was psychological insight. Humans respond more strongly to symbols than to substance. We react to narratives more than to raw facts. Machiavelli understood something modern neuroscience would later confirm. Emotion drives cognition more than cognition drives emotion. When perception is shaped, belief follows. And when belief shifts, identity follows. This is why propaganda has always relied on repetition, emotional imagery, and simplified narratives. Not because people are foolish, but because emotion binds ideas more deeply than logic. The fear of losing mental control is intensified when we realize that perception can be engineered, not dramatically, but subtly, through framing, through emphasis, through omission. Many people believe they are rational actors. that they evaluate information objectively, that they arrive at conclusions independently. But psychologist Daniel Kahneman, in Thinking, Fast and Slow, demonstrated that much of our thinking is automatic, intuitive, and emotionally driven. He described two systems of thought. System 1, fast, instinctive, emotional. System 2, slow, analytical, deliberate. Most daily decisions are guided by System 1. System 2 activates only when necessary. This means much of our mental life operates beneath awareness. The fear emerges when we recognize that we are not fully conscious architects of our thoughts. Biases influence perception. Confirmation bias filters information. Availability bias exaggerates recent or vivid events. Framing effects change decisions based on wording alone. When we realize this, pride resists, because ego prefers the illusion of complete rational control. But the mind is not a fortress. It is a living system, adaptive, reactive, influenced. And awareness of this can feel destabilizing. The fear of losing mental control has always existed, but today it feels sharper, more immediate, because we live in an environment designed to capture attention. Algorithms analyze behavior. Content adapts to preferences. Emotionally charged headlines outperform neutral ones. This is not inherently malicious, but is powerful. When information is personalized, reinforcement increases. When reinforcement increases, beliefs solidify. Over time, people can live inside feedback loops, seeing only information aligned with existing views. And the deeper the loop, the harder it becomes to notice it. When individuals realize this, a quiet anxiety forms. Not paranoia, but awareness. The mind is being nudged, repeatedly, and nudging, over time, shapes thinking. The fear is not that influence exists. The fear is that influence is continuous. Interestingly, when people feel their freedom of thought is threatened, they often react strongly. Psychologists call this reactance. When autonomy feels restricted, individuals resist, even if the restriction is minor. This explains why forced persuasion often backfires. The mind defends itself. The more obvious the attempt to control, the stronger the rebellion. But subtle influence bypasses reactance. That is why soft persuasion can be more powerful than force. This creates an inner tension. We fear manipulation, yet we are most vulnerable to it when it feels voluntary. And that paradox fuels anxiety, because we do not know where influence ends and choice begins. The ego thrives on certainty. It prefers clean narratives. I am strong. I cannot be manipulated. My mind is mine alone. But psychological maturity requires humility. The mature mind understands. I am influenced. I'm biased. I am emotionally driven. And that is human. The fear of losing control often decreases when control is redefined. Control does not mean immunity from influence. It means awareness of influence. It means observing one's own reactions. It means questioning impulses gently rather than denying them. True strength is not rigid independence. It is flexible awareness. At its core, this fear is existential. If thoughts can be shaped, if beliefs can be revised, if identity evolves, then what is permanent? Philosophers have long debated the stability of the self. Are we a fixed entity or a constantly changing process? If identity is fluid, then influence is inevitable. But influence does not erase the self. It participates in its evolution. The real fear is not change. It is unconscious change. When change happens without awareness, it feels like loss. When change happens consciously, it feels like growth. The difference is awareness. So how does one reduce this fear? Not by isolating from influence, not by distrusting everything, but by strengthening internal clarity. Ask, why does this idea appeal to me? What emotion does this message trigger? Is this reaction immediate or reflective? Awareness slows automatic thinking. Reflection activates deeper cognition. Over time, Individuals who practice observation develop resilience. Not immunity, resilience. They recognize persuasion tactics. They notice emotional framing. They identify when fear is being triggered, and this recognition reduces vulnerability. Inner authority grows not from dominance, but from consciousness. Here is the final truth. Total control over the mind is impossible, but conscious participation in shaping it is possible. You will be influenced by culture, by language, by relationships, by experience. The question is not whether influence exists. The question is whether you are aware of it. The fear of losing control diminishes when control is redefined. Control is not rigid defense. It is mindful engagement. It is the ability to pause before reaction, to question before belief, to observe before absorbing. And in that pause, autonomy returns. Not perfectly, but powerfully. The human mind is not a machine. It is a living, adaptive system. It absorbs. It reacts. It evolves. Fear arises when we mistake vulnerability for weakness. But vulnerability is simply openness. And openness, when paired with awareness, becomes wisdom. Machiavelli studied power over people. Modern psychology studies influence over minds. But the deepest power is neither. It is self-awareness, the ability to witness your own thinking, to notice emotional shifts, to recognize persuasion without paranoia, to evolve consciously rather than unconsciously. Losing control over the human mind feels terrifying because it feels like losing yourself. But the self is not fragile. It is reflective, and reflection is power. Not loud, not dramatic, but steady, quiet, unshakable. And once you understand that, the fear begins to dissolve, because awareness is the one form of control that cannot be taken from you.